enough to feed you and your family for the rest of their lives, for your tribe, your village, your clan, all the money you'll ever need. Well, that, of course, produced predictable results. You had someone trussed up in the back of a pickup truck, brought to the U.S. This is not Ahmed the tailor. This is Ahmed the terrorist. That'll be $5,000, please. The other things made it more acute. The administration's own data reflects that only 5% of the prisoners at Guantanamo were captured by the U.S. military. The rest were handed over to them by the Northern Alliance or Pakistan intelligence agents or drug lords or warlords in Afghanistan. It made it inevitable that the number of people you got who actually had intelligence would be very small. And as a consequence, you got people, it was just the most preposterous thing. Some in this audience, Joanne, you're excluded from this question, may know the answer to this. Does anybody know the youngest prisoner, according to the Pentagon, not according to me, according to the Pentagon, the youngest prisoner to come to Guantanamo? 15? We have 15? Do we have anything like that? 10 years old. So, I've got the sites for it if you want to see. So it's all cited in my book. This is according to the Pentagon. The youngest prisoner there was 10 years old when he got there. There were some reports that said he was 9, but the Pentagon said he was 10, so I say he's 10. The second youngest was 12. After that, he was 13. There were some who were extraordinarily old. Extraordinarily old. There was one guy who the interrogators called him Al-Qaeda Claus. When he was released, an intrepid reporter for the New York Times tracked him down in Pakistan, and he was babbling incoherently. He said that he was 105 years old. Another guy who had had a war wound, half his head had blown off when he was in conflict during the Russian conflict in Afghanistan. And interrogators, essentially non-communicative, interrogators there nicknamed him Half-Head Bob. He was there for 10 months. All right. Well, let me come back then to Mr. Habib. So we've got the two assumptions. Mamdouh Habib is now home. I have the distinction, and it is a courtesy that I don't quite understand, to be the only lawyer who was allowed to fly home with his client. In January of 2005, I received a call from the Australian embassy, and they said, would you be willing to fly home with Mr. Habib? And I said, of course. And they said, meet us on such and such a day and time at the Miami International Airport, and we're going to pick you up, at midnight. And it was all very cloak and dagger. Don't tell anyone. And we're going to fly to the base and pick him up, and then you'll join us on a flight to Sydney. And I want to tell you just very briefly about the flight was utterly without incident. He wasn't shackled. He wasn't, he slept most of the time. The security guards that were with us on the flight, Australian, they slept most of the time. Everybody was fine. But I want to talk to you about when he came to Sydney. We step off of this very nice corporate Gulfstream jet, and he walks down the metal steps and he bends to kiss the ground at Sydney. And my co-counsel in Australia steers us to this very, very rickety private 6-seater prop plane, which looks very unsteady, but we've just been on a 40-hour, 24-hour flight, and we weren't, I was thinking about it, it's okay, we'll take a cab. But he said, no, we want you to, because he wanted to avoid the media scrum, because there's a lot of media assembled there. So we climb up the steps of this old prop plane, and he's going to take us to another neighborhood airport near where Mamdouh is. And Mamdouh walked in, and he looked inside, and he saw a woman sitting in the third row of seats. Her hands folded, plain white pants, black blouse. And it was his wife, whom he hadn't seen in nearly 4 years. Interrogators at one point during his interrogation had told him that his wife had been killed. And this was a surprise to us. We didn't know that she was going to be there. And he collapsed. He sort of stepped back on the stairs and fell into the plane and fell into the seat with her. And my co-counsel and I will always treasure this. He had the good sense to bring a screen that he put between the second row of seats where we were and the third row where they were. And as we turned, and this is late January, so it was a beautiful day in Sydney, and took off into this crystalline blue sky, I could hear Mamdouh and his wife crying in the seats behind us. I've been a lawyer a long time. Like Jacob, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I've had the privilege of delivering wonderful news to clients. I've had the burden of delivering the worst news to clients, particularly when I represented men and women on death row. And that was the most rewarding and precious moment in my careers to see my client reunited with his wife. Let me turn then to the third assumption of the administration's detention policy, and that, I think you will agree with me, is this. Let's assume that you need to create this environment. Let's assume that you have the right people there. Both of those assumptions are questionable, but let's assume that they're both true. It seems to me that the third assumption, the important assumption, is that whatever moral justification there is for this environment, it disappears when you're no longer interrogating them. That is, if it is an intelligence gathering process and you're not intelligence gathering anymore, you don't need to create this environment any longer. And that is why I met with some satisfaction when in June of 2005, the administration announced that 70% of the prisoners at the base were going to be released. They were not a threat to the United States. They were not a source of intelligence any longer. We were going to release them. And most of the remainder who were there were going to be moved to a facility called Camp 6. It was a medium security facility. It was, they said, consistent with the Geneva Conventions. There will be communal living. There'll be an opportunity for more contact with the outside world, et cetera. They were concerned about the quality of life. And they said at that time, this is 2 years ago, that 75% of the prisoners were no longer even being interrogated. So they're not interrogating people. They're not gathering intelligence, so they're going to do the morally justifiable thing, which is release them or put them in long-term. In June of 2006, 3 prisoners committed suicide at the base. They were in a maximum security wing. Camp 6 had not yet been completed. I will spare you the details of how they did it, but the administration reacted to those suicides by concluding that there would be no more suicides at the base. And they retooled Camp 6 into not a maximum security facility, a super maximum security facility like the one at Florence, Colorado, or Marion, Illinois. Prisoners now pass their endless hours locked in concrete cages. By design, the majority of prisoners there, even prisoners who have been cleared for release, are now at Camp 6. By design, they are not allowed to see, hear, or touch another human being. Most of the prisoners who have been cleared for release remain there, and the administration maintains that they may be held there for the duration of the war on terror. I want to close with these things, and if I have time, take questions. My name appears now and again in the paper, and when it does, it's usually associated with, Joe Margulies says such and such. I always get emails. And many of the emails I get are very nice. And people, increasingly, as time has gone on and we've gotten a little distance from 9/11, people are overwhelmingly very gracious. Not always, however. And sometimes I get emails like this. And this one is unusual because the guy signed his name. Dear Professor Margulies, I am sure the Third Reich would have loved an American, in quotes, like you during World War II. If your philosophy and temperament had been the rule of the day then as now, we would have lost that war thanks to people like you. You should be ashamed. You are a thin-skinned, coward traitor, and I hope you get your just desserts. I am often accused of being depressing in my conversations, in my remarks. And I do not mean to be. And I don't want to end this talk that way. I have no doubt, despite the views expressed in that email, that the United States will reclaim its moral compass. I have no doubt about that at all. I know that like I know this is my left hand. It is simply a matter of time. The last chapter of this book has already been written. The last chapter has already been written. And the last chapter says that we will look back on the rusting shell of the prison at Guantanamo Bay with a mixture of astonishment and disgust. And I would leave you only with this. The only question is, how many pages we have to turn, how much damage we do to our country, to our Constitution, before we reach that welcome day. Thank you very much.